allowed to bring?
When we do court security, we don't allow them to bring backpacks or any other things. Allow them to take purses in.
Test.
He's just playing me back because I was talking. Okay. Got it. Come on up, man.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, there she is. I just actually.
You're ready.
All right, we're going to call the meeting to order. Thank you all for joining us. May we please start with a roll call? Ms. Farmer. Or do you want us to just go around the room? What's easier?
Counselor Bosman's,
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Buell,
Here.
Counselor Woodruff,
Here.
Yazzie,
Here.
Mayor Youssef.
Here, and also at the table.
Jose Madrigal, City Manager.
Aaron Hyder, Assistant City Manager.
Great, thank you. All right, we're going to start with future new business and review of the agendas. Does any counselor have any future new business to bring up? Go ahead, Gilda.
Yes, Gilda Yazzie here. I'd like to start the discussion for the next study session about ADUs and how to maybe make them effective in the attainable, affordable market for housing, and then review the ordinances to make them all equitable, because I understand they're in different zones right now. So if we could, start putting that on the agenda, that'd be great.
Council thoughts?
I am supportive of that.
Do we have any upcoming, I guess I'm looking to, with the LUDC codes, land use development codes, any updates? Because I know I know your staff has been working on that. Sorry, let me focus in here. I know your staff has been working on that. And so do we have any updates coming up with that new, I don't know, housing with Eva maybe?
Scott, do you want to? I'll have Scott Shine provide an update if there's anything on that portion that might be upcoming.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Councilors. Scott Shine with Community Development. We just did a round of updates related to the ADU program, probably late 2022, fall 22. Be happy to come back and sort of summarize what we did with those updates, we also launched a fee rebate program to encourage more ADU construction as part of those updates. But again, we're happy to come back and give a status report. The next round of amendments to the code that we're anticipating are related to the boards and commissions refresh in the community development boards. But that'll probably be more fall timeframe, early winter when we bring those. But if you'd like a quick update on ADUs, we'd be happy to do that.
Jose, do you have any thoughts?
No, ma'am. It's
Okay.
got the council's pleasure.
Okay, I would support that too. So
Okay.
at a future, I'm not sure about the next study session because we have to talk about our schedule. But once we talk about that, then we can talk about adding that to the list.
Gotcha. And just to be clear, just a kind of a general presentation of ADUs, where they're available, what we do. That's what we're looking for. Okay.
Other counselors?
I had three,
Okay.
so I'll start off with the first one. The first one is malfunction junction. I listen to all the meetings when I'm not here. So I listened to the prior meetings, and I was a little bit surprised that council didn't get very detailed feedback from the public engagement effort that took place by staff. As a matter of fact, I get a lot of feedback that's not very supportive of the two options presented, one being the crossover and the other one the roundabout. And I also was a bit surprised to see that one of the arguments to exclude one of the other options, which is the northbound left turn on 3rd Avenue into 14th Street, was due to visibility concerns, one of the reasons I think. And in my opinion, is the opposite. Visibility would be very good if you go northbound. Having said that, I really would like to have a direct line of communication from our community to council, which initially was to the boards and commissions, but they are or will be dissolved. And when we discussed that process of dissolving the boards and commissions, it was with the pretext to have citizens or community working groups to discuss specific topics. And I think this malfunction junction approach project would be a great opportunity for us to follow up on that commitment to have that line of communication and a possibility for a community to have their voices heard in a group and then brought back to council. And that's specifically for anybody in our community, but especially those living and using that area. So my, I guess, request is if there's council support to start working on these project-based community working groups.
Can you give us an update, Erin, as to the community working groups? I believe that we have already started those. Yes.
We have started some initial working groups related to specific projects, both park, potential park naming project. The group, the DEICFT, is starting to launch a working group for the land acknowledgement project. And the community engagement CFT is also working on and presenting a draft working group criteria framework to the ELT on Tuesday. So that group is definitely working along and creating some framework around how we determine and utilize working groups throughout the organization. So that's where we're at right now.
I know you were out and I know you listened to the meetings, but maybe an update too on like when you have your one-on-one with Jose on where we're at with the community specialist and that whole program moving forward, because I feel very confident and comfortable with where we're at with the community engagement specialist. And then the presentation we received at the last meeting, I'm comfortable with, so.
Thank you for those updates. I'm wondering if it would be possible to go ahead and form a working group for the malfunction junction, since there is a lot of community resistance where the proposed mini roundabout might take place.
I'm pretty comfortable with where our staff has done outreach and reaching out. I don't think a working group of people that aren't engineers and aren't planning is going to be helpful at all. I think presentations and staff, like community outreach, like we've been doing, great. And I was super supportive of what was presented.
I'll also am wondering, we're set with the very, very initial stages of this process
Mhm.
that I know it's going to take, I mean, many, many more years. So I guess I'm wondering at what point and how in the past have we engaged with community and staff thoughts on the timing for a potential working group? My first question.
It may be of just a way to kind of help with this, so we don't get into too much discussion with it, of if there's a need that staff provide an update on the process of where we're at for the Midtown Safety Connection, and report to council of kind of the steps they have taken, what is planned to do so. I do not see Sarah or Devin here, so I don't have that update that I can pronounce, but it might help just to get that background of as to where we are today, what we have received, and then maybe get direction from council after a presentation that updates the
Well, we
council.
did have the Midtown Safety update.
Okay,
I believe you might have.
Last time.
that was the last time I was at the meeting.
And so we did just have
Okay.
that at our last city council meeting. So I'm not, I mean, maybe at some point in the future, absolutely, but I don't think it needs to be another one
Okay,
anytime soon. That's what I'm wondering about this. And I had another just kind of question for you, Mark. This is future new business, and this is, so we're talking about scheduling a working group. So I'm just wondering, I'm just going to throw that out there to you to help me with that quandary.
Let me suggest that before you would ever be required to make a vote to finalize something by ordinance or by budget to increase something, to increase the budget to do something, you would have the opportunity as counselors to request an additional public hearing prior to taking that vote. And in the conversations we've had about our agenda, we want to get to a point where most of our business we will take care of with public comment at a meeting before you vote on it. But if there's something where a counselor feels like there hasn't been enough information communicated to the public, or if the public is contacting you, I want to know more about this before you guys vote on it, then under other business on the new agenda, you could always request that you have a separate public hearing to consider the different options for, I don't want to call it malfunction junction, the area we're talking about. So that's what I would suggest, is that you let the administration do its work. And when they tell you that we're getting to the point where we're narrowing this down to where we're going to want to vote, if you want more input, then you exercise your authority as a council member and you say, I'd like to conduct a separate public hearing. You don't need to do a work group to steer it, because you've got administration who's still working on that. But you always have that ability to call in the broader public if you have 2 more votes of your council to schedule that public hearing before you go to a public vote on something that would, control an intersection. That's how I'd suggest you do it.
May I clarify something? Is that okay, or do you want to comment first? Now, the working group is the reason I bring it up is because we are in a relatively early stage, even though this has been going on 2 years, and we're going towards a path of spending probably $300,000 on a consultant to do the detailed workout of the design work. And in my opinion, a working group would help set the initial direction we're supposed to go, confirm it or clarify it. And that's why I bring it up, because it needs to be at the early stage. If we do it at a public hearing, when we have a worked out design and specification, we've spent $300,000. It's very difficult for council to say, oh, we spend it, but now we're going to go. Sorry, Dave.
Just want to take a step back, maybe just even for my own information, if you all already know, what is the working group process? How do we establish one? Who qualify, or what qualifies as being able to even get a working group? So I think maybe that might be good constructive information. So then that way we can does this even qualify? Does this even fit within the rubric?
Yeah, Councilor Wilbur, that's a great question. And what I was referencing earlier, the community engagement CFT that we continued after the initial group launch this spring. Their secondary task after launching Connect and Engage Durango was to do exactly that and define and give structure to working groups and give some framework in which how are they identified? What do we utilize them for? Is that the best way to engage the public depending on how it aligns with our strategic plan? So, and that is on a spectrum from anything from public comment to a public forum, all the way up to a working group. And so that CFT, who I'm the liaison to, we're presenting to the ELT on Tuesday for initial comment and feedback around kind of the draft that we formed, because we do think that's an important piece, an important tool to the working group concept. So I don't have those answers for you, I think, but that is what the group has been working on and is going to present internally on Tuesday.
It might be, yeah, I just think that'd be good for clarification. So then that way, you know, what from the public standpoint, like how do we become a part of a working group? How do we even like start the process? And so just some transparency and clarity around that might help all of us.
So what I can tell you is that you as a council with a majority vote can form a group to assist you in making decisions, but you can't pass that decision on to anybody. That's what you guys were elected to do. So you can, you know, create working groups and committees to a point where they're no longer effective because you're getting too many differing opinions or too many varied, it can really slow down the process. So it's really your discretion on, you know, when you want to use those. And when I say you, I mean you as a council, a majority of the council.
All righty. My concern is the fact that I need to have verification that the public has been involved in this process to go ahead and do reconstruct the intersection down there at the end of 3rd Avenue. Now, it seems like having a working group at this point, we should wait until we get the report from in 2 weeks. And then in the meantime, what I would like would be in your report, if you could make available the names of people you have reached out to in the community and what kind of contact you had with them. Say if it was a phone call or if it was an email, some way, because what I'm afraid of is since the previous council eliminated the input of a lot of the boards and committees, so we don't have a full pulse. We don't know the status of a lot of the population here in Durango. That is my concern, to make sure that we reach out to the community to make sure that they're aware of what's going on here. So if we could have some data and maybe some names of people that you've reached out to during this process, that would be very helpful.
That's a good point. As we go through, you know, I think staff does a good job of collecting that. That's a very good point. And also there's other ways in which we've engaged the community on some of these projects, just to throw it out there. We've had open houses, we've had multiple different options. To me, I think obviously we don't have the parameters around a working group yet. So to me, it's too early to be taking that step. Also, I think it's too early in the process. We absolutely will be involving the community, in my perspective, in the right way and in the right time. And that will be, yes, our directive to staff along the way. And I know that staff is aware of that. When is the question, and in what way is the question? So I think for me, it's a function of waiting until we figure out what the working groups are all about, and maybe even a recommendation from staff on how to best engage the community in what forums it will be most effective to gather the right input and do, as Gilda is requesting, be able to provide council with input that we've received from the community. Yes.
Yeah, I have a last closing comment on that, because I think the majority of council is against that topic. But to me, when I hear the explanation, it is the working group seems to, the way they're structured now, inform staff, and then it goes to the executive leadership team. And the boards and commissions were a direct line of communication from our community through that board and commission to council with recommendations. So we're missing that direct line of communication in that sense. But I made my point.
I'm just going to agree to disagree. We can do that because I think we have other avenues and we have multiple ways in which the community can communicate with council. It doesn't have to go through an advisory board. It could go through the FAB board if we want it to. It could go through a working group. It could go through city council office hours. It could go through direct contact to you as a city councilor. There's a lot of different ways that the community can contact us and be in touch with the city council. So it's okay. If you think that the only way we can gather information is through advisory boards, that's absolutely your perspective. But anyway, I think that the message is from the majority of council is that we will wait until we figure out the best avenue with which we will engage the community.
And while I can, it's a perfect time to do a quick plug. If you go to our Connect and Engage Durango on the website, it's a home link at the top. We actually have have about this project about Midtown safety and connectivity. It talks about the project, has the current status of where we're at. And we're also having a conceptual questionnaire that we are soliciting input right now from citizens to fill out. So there's still more input coming in as we're going through. It hasn't stopped, and just a good time to kind of plug that Connect and Engage Durango. And then Dancy Clancy will start July 17th as our community engagement specialist. So she's coming on board rather quickly, and that'll also help us begin to guide this and provide some more opportunities to continue to have that public engagement component.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Councilor Bosman's number 2.
Number 2 will be very quick because it was a similar request for the pedestrian and bike connections to downtown to have a working group for that. I won't go into details, assuming that everybody on council has the same position of not having a working group for that topic.
Yeah, when it's appropriate, again, same, my advice would be the same to staff. Please engage, let us know the best forum and or multiple forums in which we can gather community input.
Are you talking about the same ones that we spoke to about a month ago that you brought up initially?
Yeah, well, it's part of the northern connection would be part of the Midtown connection.
Okay.
And I feel we have, well, no, it's okay. I appreciate majority of council's decision. The third one is and I have to be a bit careful in the way I word it because it's more operational, but I'll make my point. I would like to see if there's support from council to request the city manager to improve the finance purchase policy. And I'll explain why I say this. We have a lot of times consultants doing the first concepts, and then they are the ones that are going to execute all the follow-up study work. The downtown next steps, I think the first concept was $100,000. And the follow-up work that was awarded to them, I believe, was 1.2 or 1.4 million. The same with the parking management study, probably also in the order of $100,000 initial study with a lot of recommendations that required consultant involvement. And that's going to add another 0 maybe to the total fees on consulting. Another one being Malfunction Junction. The traffic study is probably going to be the same consultant that's going to bid on the follow-up design and specifications. So I don't want to be in the operational part, but I think as a council, maybe good to see if we can make improvements where we have not a consultant in general terms, making recommendations that create a lot of work for them because they will likely do the follow-up work. And maybe finance staff has suggestions on how to improve it, but I was just wondering if council would be supportive of having that brought to us by the city manager.
I'll jump in. I think there's a fine line between knowing enough to make good decisions, and also knowing that I'm not the expert or we are not collectively the experts in any given field. And so I often rely on the experience and know-how of others that do this on a day-to-day basis and have degrees and advanced degrees in their respective fields. So I would hate to make a decision without any sort of information from an outside person that has really good expertise and knowledge in that field, and then make a decision that could cost us money, time, energy, heartache, however you want to look at it in the future. So I agree that we don't just need to pay a bunch of consultants to tell us what to do, but at the same time, I think it's really important that we make good decisions based upon relevant information and accurate information for people that do this, in my opinion.
If I can take a timeout just for a second, it sounds to me like Counselor Bosman's is proposing a policy change on how consultants are used. That is not proper to debate in a study session. If Counselor Bosman wants to make a policy change, he needs to put that on a regular meeting agenda where the public can participate. And to go forward in the process, it's going to need 3 votes. So, and I don't want to speak for you, but if that sounds to me, that's what you're doing, is you're suggesting that you would like a policy change. Policy change are done by a majority vote of the council. To telegraph or to support that in a meeting where the public is not fully participating is something I want you guys to move away from. So my suggestion would be, if you truly want to do that, let's get it on a regular agenda, see if it can go forward and then be debated instead of doing it here where the public can only listen and not participate.
I think that is what I didn't want to discuss an actual policy. I was hoping to get support from council for the city manager to review the finance policy, given the concerns I have, bring it back to council, and then have that proper meeting where we can say yes or no, or go into details.
Okay, Gilda.
Okay, so what I understood Olivia saying was that he wants to review, I think, the specifications for a certain project that's going forward. Now, I would be in support of, once the planning department or whoever's in charge of a certain project comes up with a list of specifications, to review that before it goes out to bid. Because I'm not certain that, from just what I've seen, that the departments actually know what the construction process is. So I would be in favor of, when they come up with a plan, that they send their final specifications, say they need, 100 yards of cement or whatever they come up with. We need to have 50 feet of, curb. If they send that specification to city council and we can review that, that would be a good thing.
So I agree with Counselor Woodruff in terms of, we have a purchasing policy. It's in place. We follow it. It has been vetted out. It makes sense. You're talking about our kind of like our new division that we have that keeps track, right? Of what is, she's under Allison, what's her name?
Jennifer Holland.
Jennifer Holland, yeah, who runs all of it and does all that. I don't want to see, that's not our job is high level set policy. It's not to count the feet of curb that someone's setting in. If you want that job, that is like in a department and a division. Like as city council, we need to be worried about policy, which I believe we have in place. And I think we're good to go. So.
Great, thank you. And I'll just weigh in. I agree too that this is getting that fine line, like you said, Counselor Woodruff, of operational versus policy. We're here to set policy. I also appreciate what Mr. Morgan said. If there's a request from a counselor for a policy change, this is not the venue of which to do it. So I think that you've got your majority position on that as well. Any other new business from councils? All right. Great. With that, let's move on then to update from Visit Durango on first quarter 2023 activities. Thanks for joining us, Rachel.
Highlights of our performance for January through March of 2023. As a reminder, I'm Rachel Brown. I am the Executive Director of Visit Durango. Visit Durango is the 501c6 nonprofit destination management and marketing organization for Durango and La Plata County. This is going a little ahead of Q1. This actually just got finalized last week, but I'm really excited about it. So I wanted to go ahead and share it with you now. As a nonprofit, we have a new vision and mission statement created by our board and our staff. So our new vision is Visit Durango inspires our community to find a balance and make La Plata County an inviting place to live and visit. Our new mission is Visit Durango serves La Plata County by channeling the power of visitation. I'll start with some lodging data from Q1. And the reason that we like to share lodging data with you all is it's a really easy, kind of simple way to gauge the health of tourism in the community. You know, if people are staying at our lodging properties, it means we have tourists in town, jobs are more stable, businesses are thriving, and tourism is contributing to our quality of life. So for Q1, hotel occupancy in the county was 49.2%. And that was just a 1% increase year over year. So basically we're looking at flat levels of visitation there from the previous year. A little bit of a difference on the short-term rental market. That was at 54%, which was a 7% increase year over year. We have a new data provider, Zartico. We upgraded from our previous platform, which was Datafy. This is the tool we use to track levels of visitation to the county and the city. One benefit of Zartico's is we have unlimited POIs or points of interest. So we're actually able to, draw boundaries around every attraction and business that we want to track visitation to. If you've ever been to the dashboard page of our website, it's been a little clunky in the past. So that's another benefit of Zartico is we're going to have a much better, more user-friendly dashboard. So I would encourage you all to go to the dashboard, check it out. If there's anything on there that you'd like more information on or any data that's not on there that you're curious if we are able to track it, I would love for you to share that with me. It's just durango.org/dashboard, or think about it as I'm presenting and let me know at the end. But we'd love to make sure that all of our stakeholders are getting the data that they are interested in getting. Starting with the destination management department, we had some milestones here in Q1. Our resident sentiment survey results were released. We also released an executive summary and report on that community engagement process that was sent to you several months ago via email. We did a diversity, equity, and inclusion assessment through one of the major associations we're a part of, which is Destinations International. And we have started year 2 of our 4-year process to become Mountain Ideal certified. This is the highest level of sustainable certification that a mountain destination can receive. So you can understand why it's a 4-year process, but we are chugging right along there. Some partnerships and community relations updates. So we are big participators and supporters of the Clean Commute Week put on by the city. We got the trophy for the winter clean commute, and actually last week we got the trophy for the medium-sized business. So, we are really committed to sustainability, and our staff likes to say we walk the walk, pun intended. Some new partnerships for destination management. We're really trying to connect more with the Forest Service and our open spaces for our sustainability efforts. So we've reached out and are partnering with several partners, some of whom are now on our destination management committee. We hosted a partner extranet training to make sure all the over 700 tourism businesses in the county know how to access their listing on our website, post deals, post events to our event calendar, which is one of the most popular pages of our website. An exciting milestone. So we have the San Juan Skyway, and this committee existed for quite some time. And then through COVID, they actually stopped meeting and basically existing. And this was a big problem because it could threaten the status of the Skyway, and it also threatened their ability to get grants for projects and programs in the future. So our team stepped up and took the lead on reforming this committee for the San Juan Skyway. And not only did they do that, but they also applied for a grant and received a reimagined grant from the Colorado Tourism Office. Event marketing, I'll start off with the grants piece of that. So a total of $26,000 were awarded in Q1 to these 8 different events. But I will say, again, kind of skipping ahead to today, we have tapped out of the total amount of those funds for those grants. The committee also did a lot of enhancements to the process in Q1 to improve it both for those applying and so that to make sure that the committee was awarding grants to events that really met goals of what council has previously directed. So they improved the user experience, diversity, equity, and inclusion, sustainability and environmental impact, and accessibility and event resources. And then moving on to our programmatic events. This is a big piece of our events marketing strategy. So specifically in Q1, we wrapped up the very tail end of Holiday Station. We had our first ever Durango Restaurant Week, and our staff has also been working very closely with the 4th of July celebration committee with the city. So that's happening right now. Hopefully everyone's having a great time. And this is just some of the marketing creative pieces for the 4 programmatic events that we have planned for this year. Diving into marketing. So we have done some influencer and other PR events. One was hosting the Never Summer Pro Snowboarding women's team in Durango. And we really rolled out the red carpet for these folks. They have huge social media presence. And I will say that the community really came out, was very excited that we brought them to town, was, excited to come to meet and greets and other events where they got to meet these pros. And we hosted our first ever Influence Durango, encouraging influencers to really experience the off-peak season, bringing them here in winter and posting lots of social media content. We've done many organic marketing consultations in Q1, just to name a few: Animas River Days, Bar D, Bluegrass Meltdown, Segment 28, Fort Lewis, etc. We had over 750 ads that ran in Q1 of this year, and that was a 250 increase from Q1 of last year. Quick overview of the metrics of those ads: almost 25 million impressions. That was a 53% increase year over year. So definitely getting more impressions there, and 41,000 engagements. These are just a few samples, marketing samples of those over 750 pieces. And moving on to public relations, we had an excellent Q1, really trying to get the media here again to experience the off-peak season. We had, so a FAM is short for a familiarization tour, and we bring media and influencers here so that they can experience the destination firsthand and really write about it authentically. So a few were Men's Journal, Afar, and Condé Nast Traveler. Some of the highlights from the media coverage we received in Q1: Women's Health, Afar, Condé Nast Traveler, Escape, Men's Journal, and AARP. We hosted a total of 8 FAMs and had meetings with almost 50 journalists in Q1. Moving on to the sales department. So an exciting win for not just us, but also the city and the Business Improvement District. Collaborated a lot with Tommy Crosby and Tim Walsworth on this one to get the Downtown Colorado Inc. conference here for this year. And that is taking place in April. And I'll try and play this video, but if you go to a conference, usually on the last day, there's a drum roll and then everyone gets really excited and they announce where the conference is going to be that next year. So this video was created to get people excited for coming to the conference in Durango. Read that. We'll see if this sound works.
Nestled in the beautiful Annis Valley, Durango's vibrant downtown offers a unique and unforgettable experience for everyone. Be inspired by its vibrant downtown, stunning views of the San Juan Mountains, historic architecture, and flourishing community. Enjoy exploring local shops, celebrated art galleries, and sampling delicious, locally sourced restaurants downtown. Take in the views, culture, and daily life of the friendly locals as you stroll through town on the Animas River Trail. You may even see some locals float by on their way to work. Step out in front and enjoy some ragtime music at the Diamond Bell Saloon. After tour our native history from nearby Mesa Verde National Park. Did you know Durango is located between Colorado's largest wilderness area and 3 ranges? Taking from Southern Durango, Serpentine, and Narrow Beach Railroad provide access to a playground with views and an experience you won't get anywhere else. With so many outdoor activities available year-round, such as hiking, camping, fishing, rafting, biking, and climbing. And after all of the excitement, the day is over, along with some live music as you surf the Durango Hot Springs Resort and Spa. You're guaranteed to create memories for once in a lifetime. It's time to explore your passions in this enchanting mountain town. It's time for DCI Durango 2024.
So just to give you an idea of the talent on our team, they've been doing amazing things with video. Video is the king of content these days, and that's just one example of some great production work they've done. We'll also be hosting West Slopes Startup Week in August. And our team goes to specific niche trade shows to talk to tour operators and try and sell Durango as a destination for groups and meetings. One of which we went to in Q1 was the American Bus Association. We also went to Go West Summit, which is focused on tour operators from the international travel market. And the Welcome Center, of course, had a total door count of over 3,000 folks. And just always like to share our supportive board of directors with you all. The only update we've had here, I think, since like my last quarterly update is we do have a new Fort Lewis College representative, and that is Dr. Christian Sepulveda. And of course, could not do all this amazing work without our rock star staff. And with that, any questions or feedback?
Thanks so much for the update.
Thank you.
Questions, council?
I have a couple of questions, Rachel. Thank you for the update. I really appreciate it. I have one little comment on the video. It looks really nice, but you mentioned specific companies. Yeah, is that a conflict? Because if we name one bar, should you name the other bar? Obviously, the railroad and the hot springs don't have really competition, but just a thought on how other businesses in the same line of business are.
Sure. I mean, I think as a tourism product, we are what our attractions are. We wouldn't be who we are without acknowledging them. So it would be difficult to talk about all the amazing highlights we have here without mentioning specific businesses. But of course, if anyone were to see it and felt like their business wasn't given the fair share of the spotlight, we'd be open to that feedback.
Well, I'm just an observation. And the second question comes a little bit unprepared, I guess, but I was just curious, you had last year $120,000 for events, local events.
Mhm.
This year it's $180,000, I think it is. Is that correct? If you remember, what was the amount that was requested? I know you awarded probably 180.
Oh,
How much?
I feel like I get asked this one a lot, and I always have trouble remembering off the top of my head. But if you look back at the last email you received from me in your inbox, that is in there. There was significantly more requested than was given, just because, the committee does due diligence and will often just award part of what's asked for. Occasionally there are events that request something that don't receive any. Usually it's because they have a incomplete application. Sometimes it's because they can't prove significant partnerships to the city of Durango. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the city. It can be in the county, but they need to prove those strong partnerships because this is city of Durango funding. So those are probably the two main reasons someone wouldn't get funds.
No, I didn't want to surprise you with the question. I'll look at the email and I'll
Okay.
find it. Appreciate it though. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks.
Thank you, Rachel. That was just wonderful. I really enjoyed the video. And I was curious, okay, so you said that was your first restaurant week event. How did that go? And did you get a lot of participation from all restaurants in downtown Durango, or was it like even north?
Yeah, good question. I'd say it was a success, but we're also excited to build on it in future years. There was great participation. I want to say it was definitely over 20 restaurants that participated. Maybe Dave remembers, but he was a part of that. We did open that one up actually to the entire county, but for some reason, only Durango restaurants chose to participate, probably because of the name Durango Restaurant Week. But I will say one thing we'd like to see different next year is, in order to encourage a lot of participation, we said restaurants could have like a fixed price menu, or they could have a special item on the menu. And a lot just chose the special item. I think in other cities, when you've seen a restaurant week be really successful, a lot of people are looking for that kind of fixed price special experience. So I would like to encourage more of the restaurants to do that next year.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Just to answer my own question, I just saw it for 2022. The total request was 363,000 and we had 120,000 available. And I guess for this year, we are still in that process of seeing how much is going to be requested.
For this year, we have gone through the entire 180,000 that we had set aside for this year, which is part of the reason that we're asking for the additional overage from last year, which you'll be talking about at 5:30.
But have you provided this number, what was requested already
For this year,
for this year? Yeah.
I don't think I have provided that. So I can get back to you on that number. Since we just ran out of funds, I should be able to calculate that pretty easily.
Okay.
So
And was that the last circle for requests? Or is there more request opportunities in this fiscal year?
people are certainly allowed to request, but if we don't have the funds, then we'll just have to tell them that they need to come back and ask again next year.
Okay, thank you so
Would
much.
be unfortunate. Yeah.
Thank you for the update. I really appreciate seeing, especially the direct funds to local organizations through you guys. I think it's great. And yeah, I think you guys do great work. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Appreciate the update. Okay. I think we'll move on now to direction needed items. Starting with council response to impactful legislation.
Okay, Mayor and Council, I believe this one is, well, I don't believe, I know it's mine. So I'll kind of just lead a little bit of a discussion in regards to this item that I believe, Mayor, you had requested to place on the item to have some discussion. What this really tended to be, I think, circled around was the ability for council or staff members to be able to testify, respond, send a letter in regards to either being in support or opposition of legislation. And currently our process that we have right now is that it was recently amended, I think in 2021 is the year where they go to the council, and there was a clause put in that we would need to find in the presentation of whether to support or oppose legislation, have an opportunity to have both sides present to represent both sides of the issue. That can prove to be difficult and challenging if there's a need for somebody to be able to testify on behalf or against a legislation that sometimes it doesn't really meet the ability to do a meeting. So in regards to the request that was made to kind of discuss this item, one of the things that I've been familiar with in past experiences is a city adopting a legislative agenda. And what I have just printed off to you all is what CML's legislative agenda was for this past year. So the session starts in January. Before January, staff would present a legislative agenda to the council, and the council would approve that legislative agenda. We'd post it on our website. If you look at it, it doesn't necessarily have to be as complex as this. It was just a good basic one of seeing just general statements in which the city, this one says CML, but which the city would support or oppose. And that would help then when there are times for either opposition or support of legislation. If it falls in line with our legislative agenda, it's already been approved by the council. Therefore, staff and councilors would be able to respond and be able to help out in some of those matters, allowing us to be a little bit more nimble when it comes to that. Obviously, there probably may be some things that may not be in a legislative agenda or things that we don't have agreement on, and those would still then would be an opportunity to come back to council and ask if that's something that the city would like to take a stance on. We can always, I think using CMLs is a great one to take a look at and then just make some edits that might be more impactful for us, things that may not have anything to do with us, and present that to council. So really what we're looking here for is that's kind of a suggested way of being able to be more nimble for it. And if that's something that the council would like us to work on, staff can go work a little bit more, flush out the process, and then also present resolutions that would need to be changed if this is indeed hitting the mark of what wanted to be discussed. On that, I will sit and answer any questions.
Well, I appreciate that background and information. Yes, I did bring it up just because of the experience we had a couple times last year, I think, in which we had processes around that we had previously put in place that didn't allow us to respond wanted to issues that were impacting our community that we kind of wanted to potentially take a stance on, which we did not. Or in that case, I believe we took responses. I think we individually signed letters.
Yeah, that was the way of doing it where, as a counselor, you're able to state your position, but as the city of Durango, that would actually require a council support or a vote of affirmative that we either are in support or in opposition. And so that's where we would get into some parts, some things that had come up, and I can't think of the legislation, but I know I had gotten contacted by CML and said, hey, can you speak? And I was like, yeah, I think I can. And then right before I went on, I was like, wait a minute, no, I can't. As I looked at the process, so I recused myself from it. But they didn't have time for us to call a special meeting or wait for the next 2 weeks. So it would always just help having kind of what I would call your set of principles, that these are what we fundamentally are in support or opposed of it for the city of Durango. And if some things like that come up, whether it's financial flexibility, whether it's limiting zoning authority, we'd be able to go ahead and, if asked by CML, be able to present on behalf of the city of Durango, because we'd have the legislative agenda that was approved by the council.
And to be clear for council, so my thought in bringing this up was to give us the opportunity to respond faster if we wanted to. Doesn't mean we have to. So we still have to have process in place where we can ensure that we have a majority support, even if we are responding more quickly as a council. But so it just, it just gives us the potential to when we want to. And it's not an always, obviously. So it's only when we want. I have one question.
Okay, so what was your example that you wanted to respond to previously? Just give me an idea.
I believe, and the one that we had was, CML was asking for us to be able to respond on an open record legislation that had to do with being able to have a time to cure. If there
Okay.
was a posting that was wrong in executive session, there was legislation that was proposed that said we couldn't just be sued. We'd have an opportunity to correct a minor violations. And that was one where it's like, absolutely, we have been in some situations where we've had to do just settlements because it was cheaper to do so. And to be able to have an opportunity to cure would have been something I think that anyone can agree to. But again, I did not want to get out in front of council. CML needed a response rather quickly. We didn't have the opportunity to do so, and nor did we have the opportunity to have that conversation even with the council. So
Okay, then my
declined.
second question is, what do you think, Mark?
I think that state legislatures can sometimes move very, very quickly and it's difficult to keep up with them and they can amend something to make it different. So having a tool in place where you can respond quickly is good. It's really hard to adopt an entire legislative position because things do change so much, but I think it's a good idea. I think it's a good try. So if it's something easy, it works. The policy that's in place now, you can satisfy that by having a resolution either in opposition or in favor to any state legislation that's coming up. But that limits you to that where you are in your 2-week regular meeting frame. I mean, I've been a part of governments where they called a special meeting with 24 hours notice to oppose some legislation or some legislative changes. So it's great that you're talking about it. It's great to be active with it. I just suggest that most of it you take care of with the resolution. And as Jose is suggesting, that you look at the calendar. The CML does a great job of putting out, this is what's coming up in the legislative agenda. This is going to be our position on most of those issues on behalf of all municipalities in the state of Colorado. So that's a great starting point for you guys to vote to adopt the CML's position on municipal legislation. As that goes forward, you always have the ability to take a specific position on any one item by resolution. Make sense?
I appreciate the effort that went in. I know with like SB 213, there was talk about it and then all of a sudden it went through with like the session and it was like, you have 1 week, and it was kind of crazy. And that's another example of something that could have really affected Durango significantly. And so I appreciate us having, the flexibility to be able to, respond quickly. I like that you're using something like CML, but in addition, maybe implementing it with our strategic plan and goal and vision and mission to make it more Durango.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah, thank you. And yeah, I'm in support.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand a little bit better. So the process, how many times did this happen last year? Twice?
Twice that I know of. I think one was the mayor, one was me, and then maybe 3 times. One was like all of the council, which was like on a zoning bill
Yeah.
that came on. So 3 times.
So, and because I personally would like to be knowledgeable before I support something and do my research. A lot of these things are very high level and they're a lot more complex than it just appears in a summary paragraph. So how would this work? Would I still, because in the end, we're looking at a 2-week schedule. So if it's in the worst case, right after our meeting, we have a resolution that comes up that needs immediate attention and a response. But if it's typically, these things are not new, they are built up over time. The actual position that is being taken or the vote that takes place at the higher level might be at short notice, but the topic itself is not, they don't generate these over a weekend, I think. Yeah, so there is a lead time, and maybe of equal importance is for us to be, if it's an important related for our community topic, to be given the heads up, like this is coming up, and if it's coming up, which way are we, are we going to take a position, and are we going to, so we just see it coming. It's not, this is not something that comes out of the blue, these legislations.
So what I would tell you is your best source of information to educate yourself on these items is the CML. I mean, that's what they're built for. That's what they're funded for. They have an entire legislative staff that watches what the state legislature is doing. And then when you join that organization and participate in it, like Durango does, they're happy to provide that service to you. You call them up and say, hey, I'm Counselor Bozeman's in Durango, and I want to know what I should be paying attention to in the legislature. And there'll be a staffer who will talk to you as long as you want about it. They do a great job of telling Jose and myself, like, you know, this one's changed real quick, because that gets them direct feed to our council. So I don't want to repeat myself. The best tool for you is the CML if you want to get educated.
No, and I get that, but I'm trying to figure out what are we discussing here, because the system we had, if we are a little bit forward looking, works. If there's a topic that's important and we have a little advance notice, we can say, this is something, whoever feels connected to the topic can say, I want to get this on the radar screen. If you have to take a position, I feel we have to have that discussion beforehand, so we're not caught off guard with the short notice position that we have to take. If it takes place 2 or 3 times a year, it's nothing.
I can speak from my previous experience with the Restaurant Association. That is a pretty big legislative lobbying organization. You know, there's a lot of legislation on the state and federal level that really impacts restaurants on a day-to-day basis. And so sometimes you can get ahead of things and you can lobby a lot of support. And sometimes you don't get that lead time that you're expecting, because something will, like to your point, it'll just change at the last second. And then it goes from an opposition to like, we support this, or vice versa. So I think it's important that, you know, leveraging the resources that we have available, like the CML, to be able to help advise us. Because that was one thing that I liked about being the president of the Restaurant Association in Durango for the last 8 years, is like, I can't be in Denver lobbying on behalf of restaurants in Durango, but I do have an organization that does. So leveraging those assets that we have out there to be able to advise us, be like, hey man, I would really recommend that you oppose this, and we need to get in front of this, and we need your support. So,
But is that what we're discussing here? Just using
I think
CML?
we're shortening the timeline, being able to like get in front, if we need to get in front of something without
Yeah.
going through the normal due process. Am I understanding that right, Melissa? So I think what we're looking at is how do we, I hate to use the word bypass, but how do we change whatever policy or resolution? I don't know if I'm using the right words.
I think you have 2 things going on, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jose, but at the beginning of the Colorado legislative session, they have a good idea of the type of legislation they're going to be considering throughout the session. Now, senators and House members can change that during the session, but you have this framework of what's going to happen. The CML looks at that, and then they take a position on items that are going to affect municipalities. Once they take that position, they transfer that, or they transmit that to the cities, and they say, this is our legislative positions on the legislative agenda. I think what Jose is saying is we have that information by vote of the council. We can say, we will support the positions of the CML on the legislative agenda that's in front of us. That way, if it starts to get to be something where it's a close vote, the CML might call and say, hey, we need some testimony from a city like Durango to push this item over the edge. He can't do that unless he had specific authority to do that. And you haven't had that in the past.
No, we've not. I mean, what I would look at this is just being proactive. I think these are important discussions from a policy level decision for our council that helps staff tremendously in just knowing, even where's the council, where do we stand as a body before the legislation even happens, right? What do we know? And from a staff component, that actually even helps us even more as we get through the legislative agenda to kind of know maybe CML has a different stance that we're like, whoa, we had this discussion and our council really didn't see it that way. It really does provide a background for us to have those discussions of how does this council see with their powers in policymaking. And that I think makes us more prepared to be able to respond, or at least have a feeling of what it would be to be responsive. Like, oh, we know this one's a touchy subject, because sometimes we may not line up with CML. Sometimes they get pushed in different directions where you have bigger cities wanting one thing, smaller cities wanting a different thing. And we need to find out where we stand. And so when I look at this as an agenda, what I found to be the most productive is just having a good discussion as we go through of what is this as a council, do we all stand behind? What can we all agree on so that we can go and say, okay, these are our standard parts of we're going here. Now, if something does come up that's completely off counter, out of the blue, absolutely, we'd still come back and have those discussions. But from my knowledge, since I've been here, we've never really had a legislative discussion with the council as to what do you see in the state? What do you see that helps you continue to be in priority? And helps staff, but it also helps you as elected. So when, you do get that phone call, even if it's not to testify, sometimes it's a lot of phone calls of like, how do you think your city's going to be? Where are they going to stand on this issue? Without even having a discussion or even knowing them, like I wouldn't really know. And so being able to have this, I think, opens that communication and allows us to represent the city of Durango's interest at the state level.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm asking stupid questions maybe because it seems everybody understands it, but I get the CML newsletter, we get the emails, I get all the information. It's a bunch of information. And when there's a topic, it comes to us, we sign it or we don't sign it. So what is it really what we're doing? Are we going to adopt the primary positions that the CML has and say this as, or what is it? I'm missing here something.
I think this, what we're trying to do is allow council to collectively have a voice and sign off on something without having to go through 2 meetings to actually have that happen. So we're talking about shortening the window to be able to come to a consensus or non-consensus, however you want to put it, to be able to say like, hey, we support or we oppose this instead of having to, because sometimes things happen at the last second, and we have to amend, or we have to be like, oh, we got to push this over the finish line. So I think what Melissa is proposing is that we shorten that window to be able to say, hey, we want to stand behind or we want to oppose this measure that's going through the state or federal legislation. We want to put our stance behind it. And then we're trying to shorten that gap of where we have to.
So the change would be pretty much the same as we have now, except we have a one meeting to review a certain topic that comes to us.
Well, I was
And
going to
then-
ask Jose if you could outline what a potential new process would look like, such
So
that we
you-
can be more responsive.
Sure. So as you look at January, is when the session starts. I would imagine probably around October, November, we would start talking with CML on some of the initiatives or big policy issue items that the legislature will start considering. We would then provide something very similar to this. Doesn't have to be this expansive or list, but as you look at there, you'll see some policy statements of this is where the city of Durango would stand in some of those bigger reaching issue items. Present that to council, have a discussion, definitely could have, CML come as well to just give a presentation of what they see for the legislative session. And then an agenda would be proposed for the city council to adopt. If the city council adopts that legislative agenda, that gives us the policy guidance that you as counselors and us as staff both need to know where the city stands. And if it's something that comes up that's not on that, then we would come back to a regular council meeting. But it would allow us to have that conversation as to where do we stand with some potential legislative initiatives that are coming through before the year begins.
So if I understand what you're saying in practical terms correctly, it means that we have to do our research and go over this kind of material to develop a whole data package of our general positions on very broad topics that might apply to the state and then trickle down to our local level. So that to me seems a very solid, time-consuming process, only to, at the end, be able to, on a specific topic, be able to respond faster. While at the same time, we could, as a topic comes up where we have to take a position, we could just vote for it.
That's the problem more than anything. I like how you brought forth this idea of legislative update and having the discussion as a council. We haven't done that previously at this sitting council, recently they may have in the past, but we haven't in quite some time done a legislative discussion. And I think it would be helpful because as a community, we're finding that these issues that are taking place at the state are affecting us more and more. And we are, they are looking at us as to what our stance is. And so, but also what I'm interested in finding out how we had a couple issues. I'll bring up one. I think it was it 213? Where it was regarding the changing of the ADUs, right? And that was very big discussion at the state level. They were definitely wanting a response from Durango, and CML was wanting a response from Durango, and they needed it like the next day, because like you were saying, Councilor Woodruff, it was happening fast and they were voting on it before we could meet again. So we simply didn't take a stance, and that was our response. And then there was another case where we I think we didn't have enough time to wait for another meeting, but we said in one meeting that if counselors supported it, they could sign individual letters.
Yeah.
So we signed individual, some of us signed individual letters. I believe 4 out of 5 in that case signed individual letters, which worked too. But like you were saying, Counselor Woodruff, it collectively as a body also speaks volumes. And so what I was interested in doing is getting to some type of policy or procedure in place where as a council, we could be more responsive to those items that were happening at the state level quickly and fast. Let's say it's in between 2 meetings where we would need to, in that case, potentially get an email from staff saying, this is the issue. This is the issue that they want a response from. Here's the pros. Here's the cons. They need a response by 3 days from now. I need to know if there's council support to support this or not. And then we either have to respond directly to a staff to see if there's council support or not. If there were to be council support in that case, then we could send a letter from the city of Durango supporting an initiative.
I agree with that. I think
So
that is
that's what I'm
fantastic.
trying to do.
But this going through the whole process
This
of a
is a
solid,
little bit different, but I'm not, that I was requesting, but I'm not certain it's not a bad step for us to take.
But I don't think he's saying we're gonna go through everything in
But it's-
CML. No, he's not. He's saying
not.
what's applicable to Durango. Like, we're making this such a big deal when it's like,
I'm
okay,
just trying
and
to
that's what
get-
I didn't understand. So I don't want to do a whole, I think we need to focus on our community,
Yeah, yeah.
streets, infrastructure, everything. So when we start talking about big things, very important, I would like to see it come and we do that exactly basically what you said.
Okay.
And we sign off or not. And then as a body,
And
we
then-
have a
and then we
stance.
can take his response or not.
Yeah.
I like I personally, just a second. I personally, and then I'll let you go. I personally like this exercise just because I think it's educational for city council. I also think it's a worthwhile discussion to have in public as a city council. I think it might engage our community as well. So I don't think that this is a bad exercise at all. I do think we might get caught in the weeds in this, and I'm not certain. I mean, if this feels like we almost need a half-day retreat.
I wouldn't go that far. So, I mean, there's different cities that have legislative agendas, and I could have pulled a lot of them. Some of them are way more expansive than what we are, but I was just looking to find if I said a legislative agenda, I wanted to give you something that would at least have a concept of what it looked like. Does ours have to be 20 pages? No, it could be 2 or 3 pages. I mean, it could literally be, here are the things that we know are coming in this legislative session that we know we're going to be interested in. Where do we stand on workforce housing? Where do we stand on zoning? What I would call limiting our ability to do zoning. Where do we stand on any type of infrastructure funding that might be going through the state as supportive of it? Big things that are that. It doesn't necessarily have to be everything that's in CML, but it's a good starting point. And I think from a staff perspective, it would be like, okay, we see where CML stands. You see where they're going through here. As an ELT, we start picking off what are the things that we know are big issues, condense it into, 2-3 pages of a legislative agenda, bring it to the council, see if that's something that we can stand beside as a council, and then we approve it and we go on. It's not meant to be an encompassing everything that could possibly come out or anything else, but what is important for Durango on those issues that are going to be in the state level, and where do we want to stand with them?
Okay, sorry. I had, Gilda, did you want to say something?
Well, I think it's an excellent idea, so I'd be in favor of it. But it brings up another question. So if we had an urgent request from CLM to give support to something, is there a process here where we can have an emergency meeting to approve something? I mean, that's also,
You can do it. 24 hours notice, you can do it.
okay, so, and do we have to do a public notice of that too?
So yes, so we could do a public meeting, but also in order to do a public meeting, we have to have a public meeting and ensure that there's majority support for that public meeting. So again, we're constricted by a meeting. And sometimes that's what I was trying to do, is give us as a council the opportunity to change when they're in the midst of legislative sessions, changing things in days, in a matter of 3 days, things go from support to non-support. So I wanted to have us get some flexibility so we could see if council supported it by email. Because we can't respond right now.
Okay, I'm in favor of that, but when it gets into session, once they make amendments or they delete stuff, we would have to have an immediate response also.
Not always.
Not always, but I think if you do a position statement, and if you look through, and I apologize, I didn't send this out earlier, but if you look through, they're really general policy statements. They're not specifically targeted at bills, right? It's like, we're generally in support of any legislation that would assist us in being able to create more workforce housing in our community. Perfect. That's like a workforce housing statement that as staff goes through any bill that comes through, that as long as it's helping us with providing workforce housing, we know that's something our council provides or something that you're supportive of, we can go ahead and target initiative that portion of it. So they're really broad statements, not so much very particular like this bill, this. It's more of here the philosophy of Durango that we support.
Would this give us broad authority to go into an email and find consensus electronically to be able to do something like this? Or do we have to go through the public
No,
process?
you would have to go through the public process. What I would see in this agenda is if it gets approved, we would have it, we'd post it on our website. I think it's a great ability to communicate with the citizens to say, here's how we stand on some of these state issues. And as long as the bill goes through, we read the legislative agenda, if it fits in, absolutely, we'll go ahead. If it doesn't fit in, then that would be something that we would need to call that meeting and say, okay, this one didn't really fit into our legislative agenda, something we didn't consider or think of, council, where you're going through. But the part of the legislative agenda is really to encapsulate probably, 96% of everything that we know is going to be important to this council and to our community.
I will say too, like the big picture things that we're talking about, obviously we're not getting into the weeds with all the little, legislative stuff, but the bigger things, how great is it to get council's kind of support over some big things to help guide staff with our strategic plan and like where we're going forward. So I feel like it's a great conversation.
Sure.
And one, if especially like if it's not going to take a full day retreat or something like that, right? Like that, I was also like, wow, that's a lot. But like, I think it's great. I know these are big statewide issues, but they do affect Durango. And I think it's great to get council, at least support and direction as to like where we're going forward for this purpose, but then also for our own use.
Yeah, definitely. I would look at this as a for time commitment, like a study session, where we would just go and staff would provide a proposal, receive feedback, and then from that feedback, come to council at a regular public meeting and have action taken on it.
I am, I'll give my piece here. I totally support what Melissa has clarified on simplifying the process, maybe through email, so we can take fast action or position as a council. I do not support going through the whole process as current councillors on position statements on very general topics and spending quite a bit of staff time and discussion and then arguments about for or against or wasting time. I prefer our staff time and council time to be focused on our city and our urgent needs.
Just to clarify for you though, just for your information to make sure that you're aware, there was an issue that Jose did want to speak on behalf of the city of Durango. And I don't recall exactly what it was. It would have impacted our city. He didn't feel that he had enough direction from council to take a stance. So he said, no, I cannot.
But that is what we want to solve with the short notice meeting or
No,
the email
no.
support of the
That's what
position.
he wants to solve with this, with a policy statement. And so if he knew, like, for example, his situation is to workforce housing, that we support the bills that are going to be considered on the legislative agenda in 2024 for workforce housing. If something came up regarding that bill and they asked him to speak, he wouldn't have to come to us and ask us our permission. He could just go do that because, and he could testify. Because, and just one other quick thought before I forget, and then you can talk. We are already doing this, for example, with CC4CA, right? They have their legislative agenda. We approve it every year. We're members and we approve it. It's the same, it's a similar type of thing. And their policy statement, I believe, is 2 pages.
Yeah, and it's just, I got updated. The reason I say it is because we are going to review and take positions on such a broad package of very big topics. And I think that is not time well spent unless it's something that we see coming because it's not new. And we think, oh, this is in the pipeline. So because it maybe takes 2 years before it comes to the state legislator and CML, we might not be here. So to
Okay.
me, to go through that whole process in advance proactively might be great, but we're still talking about state legislator and not our home rule.
All right, well, let me get other counselors' perspectives.
I support you moving forward in the direction that we talked about to, shorten the timeline of things and get organized around it. Thank you.
Counselor Woodruff?
To me, like from a business standpoint, like this comes behind, like what's our mission, vision, core values. And so for me, in running a business, without clear direction, it's hard to build and grow and expand your business. So I feel like doing something like this from a policy statement standpoint, this allows us to give direction when it comes to policy impactful legislation that's coming down from people that live in cities and don't live in small rural communities in Southwest Colorado. So I think it's important that, I know it's probably going to be a lot of work. I don't disagree with you. I think it's important that we focus on our community. I also believe that if we give too much to our city folk up to the north and east of us, that they're going to take over all of our decision-making abilities. And I want to make sure that we remain fairly autonomous in where we are.
Counselor Yazzie?
I think we should go with it.
Okay, and I do too. So I think there we have it. All right. Thank you, counselors, for a good discussion on that. And I think then I believe then that you have support for moving ahead with speeding up the process for which we can respond, and this discussion on general legislative policy at the beginning.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I think we can move on now to study session planning and scheduling.
Okay, Mayor and Council, I'll have Devin Schmidt to come up and do a little bit of a presentation, though I'm not sure we have much. This follows a discussion that we had at a previous study session in regards to the amount of study sessions that we have. And from a staff perspective, it was asked, do we need one study session? Do we need 2 study sessions a month? And I believe my answer was, Council, it just depends on how many study sessions that you want. We'll make it work. So with that, Devin put together a study session calendar that kind of looks at what it would be like if we only had 1 study session a month. We do carve out the timing of during the budget preparation is to keep 2 study sessions just so that we can have more informational meetings. And so I'll hand it over to Devin to present a little bit more on the overview, but that was the premise of this, as it was a council recommended or council suggested item that we have a discussion on.
And then I'm going to have some comments on study sessions when Devin is done from my perspective, if that's okay.
You don't want to start?
Nope.
Okay.
Excellent. Well, good afternoon, Mayor and Council, Devin Schmidt. And yep, so Jose set the stage there for this item. Council had asked ways to condense or just different opportunities as we're looking at the study session calendar. And so what staff explored was the areas where 2 study sessions are needed, which is August, so that we're able to have the capital improvement projects to council prior to the budget retreat, since those do, require a bit more analysis of council and just understanding of those projects. That is why we have those study session for the capital projects. So in your packet, you'll see that there was a draft calendar. And so if council did want to pursue this change, it would start after this meeting. August, we would have the 2 meetings. September would be 1, October would be 1, and November would be 1. And then the calendaring for 2024 would come shortly after that, because we're cruising all along here in 2023. So yeah, so that was the reasoning behind that. And so we can definitely answer any questions, or if you'd like Mark to go now, that whatever council would like.
Great.
Okay. I wanted the staff to go first because one of my first comments was going to be when the staff tells you they need you to have a study session, that is them telling you they need to pass information to you in a public forum, just like this. So anytime they suggest that they want a study session, you need to do it. But the next question in my mind is, what do you want to get out of your study sessions? What just happened here earlier when you guys went through and you each expressed your support for developing a legislative calendar, that makes me uncomfortable. Because what you're doing is you're voting. You're trying to use every language in the world to say, I'm not voting, I'm showing support, I'm giving direction. And we shouldn't be doing that at study sessions. That is the type of thing that you want to do at a council meeting. Now, today, I didn't stop you, I didn't object, because you're in that gray area where he needs to know what you want, but you shouldn't do it in the form of voting. You should let him present to you and then say, can you bring that to us in a meeting to vote on? I mean, we can work on that type of language, but if you want to have meetings where you're going to vote, we need to do it differently. It's not truly a study session. So, and I'll look at it the other way. If you're just having a study session, if you're just receiving information, if you're just learning about the things that you'll be asked to vote on later, you don't have to go to the formalities that you go to now. These meetings are advertised with an agenda. Minutes are taken, and those are things that take up lots of staff time that aren't truly necessary if we commit to the fact that we're only going to vote at regular public meetings or special meetings. Does that make sense? So my question to you guys is, what do you want out of your study sessions? Do you want to make them more formal pre-meetings where we're going to invite the public to participate and then you're actually going to vote on things and you'll end up having 4 meetings a month? Or do you want to make study sessions just study sessions where you receive information and you do your best to stay away from expressing your opinion or lobbying for a certain position?
The one, an example that is easy for me to get my head around in this discussion, especially, is when it comes to agenda items. And I feel like, or no, I'm sorry, not agenda items, budget items. Like when we're going through the capital improvement budget, we've used often either retreats or study sessions to go through all the different projects. They basically download all the information to us in those environments. We may have discussion around it. Sometimes it can even be a robust discussion, but we're not voting until later. When we're doing the that I think is a perfect example of where you want us to go and to always be.
Correct.
It's information only. These are the projects. You will vote on them later. You can ask questions.
Sure. You can say, I don't have enough information. I want more information about EV chargers before I'm asked to vote on this. And that's probably a bad example.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I really want you to, can I sat back and listen to try to figure out what was happening with the study sessions? I asked a lot of questions of Faye and the other staff. And I said, how did we get to this point where we have these meetings where everyone wants to vote on things that they really shouldn't be voting on because it's not a properly noticed meeting? And I asked if there are requirements that I didn't know or I didn't understand, or asked why we're doing things certain ways, and didn't get any specific answers. I can just give you guys advice. I think you should have open meetings. You should meet all of the open meeting requirements. And that's probably how study sessions got to be where they were, was the state had some cases come down talking about the parameters of meeting the open meeting laws. And that somehow was interpreted as meaning that a study session had to have an agenda, had to be advertised, had to have minutes. And then it got confusing about whether you could vote or express your opinion at it. But we can walk that back, because I've looked at it all and I've said, okay, if you want to have a study session, you're all going to be together. So we can't exclude the public and we have to announce that we're doing it. But it doesn't have to be as formal as you're doing it, because if you commit to not voting at these meetings.
One more. Oh, I'm sorry.
How, if there's a split decision regarding like how, if we want direction, if we want to give direction to staff, what is that gray area then? Like, how do we give direction as a consensus in a group without voting?
That's exactly what I was just going to bring up. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just think that, for example, on this current agenda, it says direction needed items.
Right.
We just gave direction based on majority opinion, right? And so that's what we need to avoid at all times going forward. There's no direction. We just say, thanks so much for the information and or ask questions.
Sure. That's where it gets most confusing is, and I've got to do some work with Jose and see what he's comfortable with on getting direction from you guys in the proper format. The way that we're doing it now, I'm just concerned it creates some exposure for you. So the whole idea of looking for direction, that's fine if it's not on it something that is ripe for a vote. So that's kind of where you have to draw the line. If you're voting on whether or not you're going to bring something to a vote, that's the problem. But if you need more direction in the sense of, and Jose, you may want to help me here. I mean, what are you looking for at a study session?
Well, it's an interesting part to be honest, because I think that you had a past here where they were, for those that weren't here, we had like meeting every Tuesday and we had study sessions, and it kind of became a part of where maybe council wanted to just have discussions in some areas of like, oh, I'd like to know more about this, or I'd like to know more about that. And it didn't necessarily become a part of where I think some of this, like, you know, the one-on-ones are a tool, and it's not to get around it, but a lot of it is maybe one counselor just wants to get educated on ADUs. Sorry to use that, but just like, you know, on ADUs, they just wanted more information, and it would be like, well, let's just do a study session. And other counselors would go like, okay, yeah, we'll just go around it. But it really was educated more on getting direct education to one person. And then it kind of grew into this little bigger part. And for me, where I look at a study session in the part of what would I expect into it, it's really where there is areas where we're not exactly sure where the council is. And it might be a new program. It might be something, the new policy that may need to be come up through. And so we're doing an educational component is the biggest part of it. And then just determining, you know, from there, the feedback of, is this something that we should bring to a council meeting for formal approval? Or is this something maybe the council's not interested in? Doesn't necessarily have to be a formal vote, but you definitely don't want to just start throwing these big items on a regular council agenda when there's other items there and have no idea where the council would even sit and fit on those. So that's where I look at it as direction. It's an educational component of, here's something that's going on. We're just going to educate you, whether it may be an update on Midtown safety. Here's where we are. Here's what we've done. We really don't need direction. Sometimes it does formulate into a part to where opinions do get presented, and then it can easily start kind of going the other way where we're just giving you a presentation on this. And then it's like, well, I don't like this part and this part. And other people start, and now we're getting into more of a debate to where it's more just supposed to be informational only in regards to where we're at. So it is a gray area. I've been in different areas where I've had communities do it just like this. I've had other communities just do it basically just to review the agenda. That's it. So I think there's this part of this gray area of where do you have, and I do think it's an important part, because as a council, where do you have that opportunity to kind of discuss and just, you know, bigger ideas where you're not ready to make a vote or an agenda, but have that opportunity to do so, where you're not in a regular meeting and everything's like, all right, let's go, we're going to make a decision. So no, we just kind of want to kick around what this idea is. And so when I look at a study session, educational first, and then just really getting feedback, not necessarily in a vote, but, you know, most of the time I don't have to have a formal part. I can kind of already read the room of where people are at it. And so it doesn't need to go like one counselor. And then from that part, I can make the decision.
And as you guys get more sophisticated in the questions you ask, that's going to give him direction without putting you in the trick bag of doing a pre-vote. The system is already working pretty well. I mean, we had a study session where someone came to a counselor with an ordinance they wanted on the books about cats and dogs. That was mentioned in a study session. Jose and myself and the rest of staff took direction that you guys wanted to know what that was all about. So you're going to see on the agenda tonight, introduction. Is that on tonight?
It's a study session. It's next.
Oh, so it's coming up later in the study session. Okay.
You're next.
So I'm jumping ahead. So what I'm going to talk to you about is, hey, you know, we have this legislation and it can go on the agenda to be introduced next time, depending on how you guys and what you say during that discussion we have in a little while. So we're fettering things out. I don't want anybody telling me whether or not they support a cats and dogs ordinance tonight. Do not vote on it. But we should get an indication on the presentation that I make and the comments that you guys make on where we should go with it.
Whether it should come forward in a public meeting
Correct.
or not. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Say something?
Yes.
Go.
Okay, so now that I'm totally confused.
Just doing my
Okay,
job.
so, you know, I thought that this discussion about the policy statement that potentially we're going to consider at some point was good, because I learned where everybody was at. And, you know, to me, that's a good study session. We didn't vote, so we didn't do anything wrong that way. So,
You definitely surveyed yourselves about how you wanted to go forward.
Okay, so is that the gray area then? You
It
know,
is.
And I think that's where, if I can, Mark was trying to get to the part of there may be ways to say it other than the other words to use. I think it's where you were saying, instead of it really kind of almost, it looks like it goes through it, we go individually down through. Whereas it may just be more of a, we'd like to bring this up in a public meeting. Okay. Or not that this is not a public meeting, but a vote action taken meeting.
and then one last comment, and I do appreciate it, Mark, because I want to be clear on what our ethical strategy is, so we don't occur any more problem areas.
And look, on the discussion you had, I didn't stop the discussion. You guys did what you did, and I made a comment afterwards. So my job here is to protect you guys and protect the process. I don't want any member of the public coming in and accusing you of predetermining votes or determining what your votes would be at a meeting outside of a meeting where they can participate. So if you're in the gray area, you're much, much closer to the white oak area than you are to the dark black area. But as I see these discussions evolving, and some of the ones I watched on TV before I came city attorney, I want to move the opposite direction, where these meetings become more informational, more information exchanges than predicting or pre-voting on something.
I would just add regarding for example, the sale of kittens and puppies, this ordinance that we're discussing in this study session next. What I've enjoyed about our study sessions, historically, is it's an opportunity to have that discussion, not on the dais, in a much more informal environment. And so, when if we can keep it information only and not vote, and work on the language, and hopefully you'll help us with that.
Sure.
Then that does provide an opportunity for council to be in a more informal environment and, kind of like a more retreat environment where public can come, public can attend, and it's all recorded and, the public can listen, but at the same time, we're not so formal on the dais. We're not, following, all the procedural things as much. So it kind of provides that more relaxed environment in some topics.
Sure. No, it is an important function. I'm just trying to have you guys tell me how you want it defined, so we keep you going the right way.
So if I don't support the direction, like just to keep using the pet ordinance as the go-to, if I don't support the proposed ordinance, I would say I don't support the direction in which we're moving in with this ordinance.
We're talking about the cats and dogs ordinance.
Cats and dogs, yeah.
So, can we?
I'm without like saying way I would vote on something, but as it's written, I
Big
wouldn't
difference
support.
between saying, I won't support this ordinance, or I will support this ordinance, and saying, I don't need to see this ordinance on the agenda, or I do need to see this come up for a vote. I think I owe that to the public. I think I owe that to the person, whatever. So there's a distinction in that language where you're not telling people how you're going to vote. What you're saying is, I want to elevate this to a public discussion with public input where we will vote on it. Or if you don't show any interest in that, we can figure out where to go with it too.
Like we're talking in code sometimes.
But I appreciate him bringing it up. And right. So, I mean, and it's, and I appreciate the forward thinking on just making sure we're doing it right.
Sure.
And everything, and according to what's required of us, like you're saying, if we want to vote in this session, then, let's call it that and have it be a meeting, but we don't want that. We
Sure.
want it the informal opportunity. So we just need to be careful.
Can I explain one more thing? Because we're on the eve of our new agenda too. And this all plays into a bigger picture. The cats and dog ordinance. We have a study session here. Everyone asks their questions. I'm going to present some information about it. If a counselor says, not at study session, but communicates through email to myself or Jose when we're developing the next agenda, or Faye, they say, I want to see that ordinance introduced at the next meeting. That would go on the agenda and it would have an item that says requested by Counselor Youssef. At that point, it's only up for introduction and it goes no further in the process unless it has a majority vote.
That's an important point. Go ahead.
So,
Does that make, sorry,
go ahead.
does that, the comment you just made, does that mean that, because we've always had majority of council to support anything that happens,
right?
but you're saying a councillor can put something on the regular meeting.
But the distinction is, it only appears on the introduction of the ordinance item on the new agenda. You can't have a debate about it. You can have a very brief rationale about why it's on the agenda, but you don't debate it, and you have to get 3 votes for it to go on the next agenda to be debated and voted on.
So it's under, I think it's section.
So what you're doing is, instead of having a study session where the public isn't there to participate and you're not supposed to be voting formally, instead of doing it that way, you're getting all the information. And then you decide at a regular meeting where the public can be involved and where you do take a formal vote as to whether or not it goes forward in the process further.
So on this example, to follow up on Olivier's question. So if, let's say that this pet ordinance was not on our study session calendar for today, but let's use Olivier as an example since he brought it forward. He takes the ordinance and he puts it under item number 14 on our agenda tonight, introduction of ordinances. What would happen?
It would come up.
It would come up and I would say, okay, item
Ordinances for
14,
introduction.
Counselor Bosman's, would he introduce his ordinance?
Yeah, I mean, he would have to, he can't do it tonight, 'cause it's
No.
got to be published.
It's got to,
But
no,
for the
no, I'm
next-
just,
It would have to be published in full text,
okay.
and everyone, that has to be out there for the public to consume. And then when you say Counselor Bozeman has put an item on the agenda for an ordinance, that requires a vote. Do I have a second? If there's a second, then it gets on the floor, then you can only have extremely limited discussion. And that's why? Because you haven't given the public the full opportunity to digest it between the time it's introduced and when it's voted on. So you don't debate things until you've had the public's ability to see it in full writing on an agenda and know it's going forward. Because you're shortchanging the public's ability to have meaningful input if you start debating it at introduction.
Okay. So introduction, there's basically what we would be voting on if we were doing it this way tonight, is we would be voting on whether we're going to take it to the next agenda and actually have a public hearing.
Yep.
And a vote.
Correct.
Okay.
Public comment and public hearing.
But to in public comment, not public hearing, right?
They're the same thing, but
But just to be clear though, and to answer your question, one counselor can introduce an ordinance and you don't need council support with this change.
It's not just ordinances, any
Or-
topic basically.
That's what I'm nervous
the
about.
danger
Like
is-
there is a bunch of things that were brought up that is not an ordinance. It isn't policy. Like there's things that are brought up under new item agendas that are technically staff. Like that's what staff should be working on and not us. So how do we make sure that we're just not throwing all sorts of things on these agendas to bog us down and listen to monologues about someone's platform,
so pick your poison.
right? Like
Because what's been happening is, that's been happening at study sessions.
I'd rather it here and not in a public, like in that, well, it says public meeting, but like,
The process is, you have to have a majority vote to bring it forward for a discussion. You don't have formal rules like that in an executive session.
Right.
okay, so you have to have a formal vote to bring it forward. So let's say, okay, we're just gonna use today as an example because it's on the front of my head. Counselor Bosman's brought up wanting to, what was one of your? Oh, well, no,
It's a good example.
the earlier.
The working group.
Oh, working groups. Okay, here we go. So Counselor Bosman's wants to have a working group. Now, it's just the sentence, and then does he have to have a second to talk about it? Or does he get 5 minutes? Or does he, like, what is?
Since I've been here.
Yeah.
I've been very methodical about, you want to discuss something at a council meeting, you have to have a motion. Motion has to get on the floor. It has to have a
Okay, so all he would say, all that would be on there is Counselor Bosman's wants a working group for Midtown safety.
And that.
And then someone,
Ordinance.
No, that you would place under new business. I mean, there are other places in the agenda, but again, all of those things require a motion, a second, and then a formal vote by majority. So if it never gets a second, it doesn't take up any more time in your meeting.
Okay,
That's
so
just what, that's
it
what
says
Robert's
it.
rule says.
No one seconds it.
It dies.
It dies. He
but
doesn't even
even-
get to talk about it.
Correct.
Okay.
But even if I seconded it and we had the conversation about it, but it doesn't pass, from what I understand from Mr. Morgan, if that topic has been brought up once, there's rules that can be put in place such that, let's say you bring up a, what example did you use?
Working group from
Okay,
Midtown
working
Safety.
group at this meeting tonight. And it doesn't get majority support to move forward. You can't then, there's rules that can be put in place that says if you bring something up, you have to wait, I think like 6 months to a year to 2 years.
That would be a policy of the council on how you deal with your ordinances or business, just say business instead of ordinance. But yeah, I mean, look, there are all kinds of examples around the country where you don't have a rule like that in place, and then someone will bring up the same business every meeting. So what those councils traditionally do is they say, once a matter has been disposed of by a vote, it can't be brought up again for a certain period of time. Sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes it's 12 months. That's all your choice on how you want to run your city.
And then in the last meeting, we started the timing policy. Does the timing policy apply to these items too? So if he did get a second on the working group and we go to talk, he gets 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes. Does that apply to this as well? Okay. Okay, can I ask?
Yeah. go
Okay.
ahead.
Because that answered my question for that you kind of brought up. So this all got brought up because we had a meeting that was like 30 minutes long for a study session because we didn't have anything on it. And my comment was, why are we coming in at 2:15 to meet for 30 minutes, to then have like an hour break, to then have a council meeting? And then I had been talking to some past city councilors, and they said they didn't used to have 2 study sessions every month. It used to be 1 study session a month and 2 council meetings. Now that was 3 weeks still. They didn't stack them like we stack, and I was like, okay, well, when did this happen? And it happened because there was a couple counselors on council that kept on wanting more and more discussion and information. And so it became this way where we have where you used to have a study session, a council meeting, a study session, a
Yeah.
council meeting every single Tuesday. And then when we came on, I was like, that is a lot for someone who's working multiple jobs with kids.
Right.
And so can we consolidate it to 2? Anyways, and so it's not about, I just want to make sure it's that I didn't bring this up or it wasn't talked about because I'm trying to get rid of study sessions, or I'm trying to not work or be lazy, because that's not the case at all. I feel like all counselors work very hard. But I just want to be productive, and I want to make sure what we're doing is right. I love the direction we're going with our new agendas in terms of getting more in front of the public during regular council meetings. I think like, operational updates from you, whether we're talking about housing or, public safety, or I think it's so important to do those in council meetings and not in study sessions like they have been in the past. And I think because of that, we're seeing this less time needed in study sessions. I think the potential for new business to be structured and to be in a council meeting in terms of, this is what you get to say, this is how you say it. You don't get to say any more unless you get a second and people want to hear more. You have time limits versus, study session is very casual, which is fine in certain things. I think it's important to be casual and discuss some things, but I think in a lot of ways we could be more transparent if it's in an appropriate city council meeting with timelines and proper agendas. So I am in favor of, how many study sessions do you need from us? I support, 2 for October budget stuff. I support if you need more, we do it. Like I'll be here every Tuesday at 2:15, like we have been for the last 2 years, if that's what we need. But I just felt like it was, there's a better word for stupid, but yeah, we weren't feeling, and then I felt like you were trying to find things to put in, and I'm like, why are we trying to give us busy work? I felt like we were, yeah.
Sure.
So anyways,
I look at this as everything that in my relationship with the council, it's a partnership. What do I need to be successful, and what do you all need to be successful? From a staff perspective, the scheduled study session, or the schedule of proposed study sessions, is one that works for us once a month, and have those options for budget. That works for us because it, it will stop us from, and there are times we have definitely like, what can we put on it? And we'll go in an agenda meeting and go around the room. Hey, who's got something for 30 minutes to fill this block of time? Because study sessions, or that's kind of what was the expectation, I guess, when I came here with study sessions, was that we were going to have 2 at a time. We're going to put it on there. So from my aspect is if we move it down to 1, it'll definitely be the educational opportunities and the things that are important. But that partnership then goes with you all as well in regards to, that means with new business items and study session items, we're not going to have a lot of time to just start adding things on. The study session calendar will be pretty, formulated in regards to here's what are the things that we really need. Whereas I think some of the study session items have been more on what does council want to talk about than really what does staff really need out of that study session, if that makes sense.
But if it's on regular agendas, then that is our spot to say, like, that's where, we bring up a new item potentially on the
Yeah.
regular agenda, and our regular meetings may go longer now.
Right.
If there's a lot of new business items, if that makes sense.
For sure. Yeah, that's, something that I need to kind of just have a feel for.
Yeah.
I mean, I know, Mark, you've done it before, so I'm assuming there's a part to it. It's just, from my side, what happens if we have a counselor say, I'm going to put 25 items on, and here are my 25 items and throw it on. How do we stop that? I mean, it just, you never know, right? Or, how does that part go through? What do I want to add? And do we have to, from a staff perspective, put a background information to that? Or is it just simply their request and that's it? And we don't have to do an agenda comment form or anything else, because it could then lead to a lot of staff time in putting things on there or things that we'd have to be prepared to research and discuss.
So the idea is, and this is just black letter law, you guys are a council. And the will of the council is defined by 3 votes. No, and I've met with all of you individually, and I tell you, and I laugh, I said, learn to count to 3 and this is all going to go a lot smoother. But that's the reality. If a counselor wants to try to dominate a meeting by putting 300 things on the agenda, that's a style that I've seen fail before. Because what happens very quickly is you go through those things, they don't get a second, you get real good at speaking fast, and all of a sudden, all that just gets eliminated. So if you just keep in mind that if you can work together, understand you need 3 votes to move something forward, and without that, you're not going to get a platform to discuss it, it works very well. What I walked in and saw was there wasn't a really good understanding of procedure. People were speaking for long periods of time, feeling like they weren't being heard. I heard things repeated multiple times, and that's what happens. When you speak and you feel like you're not being heard, then you say it a different way to try to be heard. And I'm not that generally I've seen in this council and in councils and school boards around the country. So the format that I keep suggesting to you guys promotes more effective communication and, more importantly, more effective handling of your business on behalf of the public. So, and I've been working with staff a lot, and I tell them this is not going to be a smooth transition. This is a big change in the way that you do things, but there is a spot for everything to happen. There's a spot for everybody to be heard. There's a spot to make sure that the public understands how things are progressing. And if we all stick to it and work with each other, you're going to have much, much more effective, much, much more transparent meetings where you all feel more heard and more listened to. So that's the idea.
I just want to give you my feedback here. I think since, so I've been 2.5 years now on council. I think since April, civility has returned. It's a lot more professional. Our community tells me continuously. The first meeting, Jessica, you led, that was a really refreshing experience after the whole period of time. I think, Melissa, with you, it's going the same way. It's, even though we don't agree, it's professional. We just vote and that's it. I think with Mark, what you've been doing in the changes in the structure and the 5 minutes and the 3 minutes, I think will only benefit our way of working together. So I think a lot of the things that we are addressing are already in the process of being resolved. I know from the study sessions, there were counselors that spoke end on end about an off track. It's okay. I think that is also moving away. As an example today. I mean, the second new business item was 1 minute because I said, okay, it's not going to happen because the first one didn't go. So I think in that sense, we are already showing to our community that as a council, we work way more professional and civil. The changes that you said, suggested for the study session make perfect sense. It will add probably to the regular meetings. I'm not gonna massacre these meetings. I want to get success as a council for our community, and I think we all do. If it doesn't go in a certain direction, it's okay. Same as with the new business on the study sessions. I think we can definitely help get more support and get more direction and staying on track with informational. I'm going to try that hard as well. So I think we're on the right track.
I appreciate that. Well, I appreciate.
You're not, no, no.
I like this calendar. Yeah, right. Right. I appreciate staff bringing this draft agenda forward. It makes sense to me. And I think these are great discussions. So I think with that,
We do need to formally talk about
Well,
Can
Right,
I
but-
recommend a break maybe?
Yes.
Wait.
Yeah.
hoping to.
does this have to go to a agenda item for them to vote on? Because I don't know that there has ever been any like decision in regards to how many study sessions they have. Scheduling, okay.
Great.
Out of curiosity, if there's an emergency, I'm sure we can plan another study session. This isn't, we're not bound by it, so it's all.
For a legislative agenda?
Yeah. That's good. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. We almost all ready to go? Appreciate it. Okay. Code ordinance.
So yes, Mayor and Council, this was an item that I believe was brought up by Councilor Bosman's at a meeting, and I think it was in May. So staff has done a little research on this, and Mark is actually going to be doing the background and presentation on this study session or educational opportunity on this item.
My first month here, I was at a study session and Council Bosman said that someone had approached him about a model ordinance prohibiting the sale of puppies and kittens at pet stores. And the staff did some work on it. And then Erin walked into my office and said this was on me. And I said, okay, how did I inherit this one? And she gave me a very poor explanation, but I said, well, I will do a presentation at the study session about it. It's a couple of pages, but my comments are at the beginning and they're very, very brief. There are a few other jurisdictions in the state of Colorado who've adopted ordinances similar to this. Certainly not the overwhelming majority of communities. The matter was actually formatted to pass or to be considered statewide. The Colorado State Legislature sent it to a committee where it effectively died and has no future as state legislation. I searched our code and determined that the city of Durango does not impose any type of business regulations on any businesses. So this would be a first if you were to consider it. You would be selecting a particular type of business and then regulating it. And then the model ordinance that was provided is there for you in full text. If any of you would want to go forward with a formal consideration of this, we would introduce it at a council meeting, but I would want the opportunity to write it with the same intent, but differently. In other words, I don't know who this was drafted by, but it's not drafted in the way that I would draft things for you for consideration of adoption. So again, very, very simply, there is no nationwide, there is no statewide, there is no case law guidance on this. It is up to you. You don't do this for any other type of business, and it would be a novel ordinance in here to regulate the sales of puppies and kittens at pet stores. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have about what the legislation would look like, what I would change, what I don't like about it, what I do like about it. But again, I would encourage you not to announce your position on it if it is going to end up on an agenda.
I was at,
Go ahead. Yeah.
Jump right in there, sorry. I was at CML and I actually was talking to another counselor who had this ordinance brought up by someone. And they got to the point, well, one, isn't there, they said, or she said that there was a state agricultural department that oversees all businesses that have to do with the sale of any animal. And that includes puppies and kittens, and that there aren't any puppy mills or kitty. Yeah, you know what I meant. Stores in Colorado, they have not allowed.
And that could very well be true.
Okay.
I didn't research that part of it.
No, that's fine. So I'm curious about that. If this does go forward, I would be curious about that.
Sure.
And then also they got into whoever introduced it to I feel like there's potentially a group of people going around to all the legislation, like
Sure.
whatever, trying to get this passed. They were pushed so much that they were told they couldn't or there was going to have to be fines or fees or whatever laws for people breeding dogs, like private dog breeders. and I don't know if, is that included here for private? And so that added to their police, whatever, anyways, enforcement.
So when I mentioned that if there was direction, I'm using you guys' words now.
Mhm.
If someone was to come to me and say, I would want to introduce an ordinance on this topic after hearing the presentation at the study session, I would work with them to do something that doesn't have some of the issues that this does. The model ordinance that was presented for you guys to study has some issues with it.
Yep.
There's some equal protection issues. There's a lot of conclusions that I wouldn't want to be in a Durango public record about the state of puppies and kittens around the country.
And then
I mean, I'm not sure I'm really answering your
Fine.
question.
I guess these are the questions I would have going forward if someone were to say they wanted to adopt this ordinance. And then the other one was, apparently there's some states around us that allow for puppy mills or whatever, and people go and buy them from these other states and bring them into Colorado because Colorado doesn't have them. And so they were wanting ways to find them or give them tickets, or whatever. And yeah, exactly. And so they made this counselor and their body was like, that is entirely too much. We're going from just not allowing a puppy mill to open up here to now all this enforcement issues. And they were like, anyways, so that was just some information I would need if we were
Sure.
going to go forward.
I can tell you just generally that trying to link, let's just call it illegal or inhumane breeders. That is trying to tie that to local legislation through the retail sale of pets is problematic. In other words, there's a big leap in the model ordinance between the accusations of illegal or inhumane puppy breeding and the retail sale of pets. So that's kind of where some of the problems stem from in the legislation.
Could you say that again? The problem is.
There's a gap between the allegations of inhumane, illegal puppy mills and local regulation of retail pet stores. And the ordinance tries to ignore that gap and make it the same thing.
So kind of building off what Jessica said, then I've got a secondary one, but through your research, what were some of the unintended consequences of people that have already enlisted some of this? I'm thinking of like the enforcement piece. Is this going to be, if somebody is caught doing it, does that now fall under the purview of police department, animal control? Like where does all of a sudden this, matrix, of who all is doing what and who all is responsible now?
Not sure I tracked your question exactly.
Sorry,
It's okay.
I was all over the board. So were you able to research any municipalities that have done this? Like what
Have prohibited it?
that have prohibited the sale and any unintended consequences that they have found because of the
Take
ordinance?
this explanation with a grain of salt, because I didn't look into it too deeply because I've got a bunch of other responsibilities too. But there are other communities that passed these similar ordinances. And my understanding is it was kind of just a feel-good thing because there were no stores, there were no places to put stores, there was no intent by any company to open stores. So I think they passed it because I don't want to speak as to why they did it, but it kind of passed, but then really had no effect. Now, the advocates of these type of legislation will tell you, you have to put this on the books first, or they'll come and infiltrate your community with this, and then you won't be able to get rid of it. That's their position. And I don't know how all that played out in those scenarios. My concerns with this type of legislation are, where does it stop? I mean, you had some very good comments at a meeting the other night about slippery slope. If you start legislating one type of business, where do you draw the line, and how to advise you on where do you stop?
Yeah, I mean, I won't go into my deliberations there. But then again, what have other municipalities done have they codified enforcement mechanisms at all?
Nope, not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
It's just a general, we prohibit this type of business. And I wish I could have reported to you that my research resulted in case law to give us guidance, but that's not the case. Both nationally and I think Destiny even pulled up a Supreme Court case where the Supreme Court, United States Supreme Court, chose not to give any input on it. They said they denied writs, saying we're not going to consider this issue. So you're kind of on your own as far as legal guidance goes. If it appears, if someone directs me to develop an ordinance, you get to vote on it then. If no one does, then you've had your discussion about it and you wouldn't move forward.
If I may, Counselor, the Lafayette, I think, is the most recent community, and it, a community that they don't have pet stores selling kittens or puppies, but all they reference really is if they received a complaint, they would pass it on to the law enforcement or animal control enforcement. So it's not, they did pass it, but they have no businesses in place as of right now. Kind of like what Mark was saying, is more of a feel-good kind of ordinance to pass, but there's not a lot of detail how it's enforced because they don't have a store to enforce at this time.
So there are, and I'll just kind of go back to more of the legal advice. There are large issues here that haven't been litigated yet. Lawyers are paid to think of the worst possible scenario, but let's say you put this on the books and then, there's a breeder of French bulldogs or whatever who does it humanely, and then they can't market their product in your community because of your ordinance. That creates legal issues that you might have to deal with down the line. But that's just kind of government. Sometimes you decide what you want to do and you deal with the consequences as they come, if they ever come.
I'll just make a little comment here. I brought up on the new business. We've all seen the emails before from the community member. I thought, and I still hope, it's a very simple ordinance that we implement, and we just are ahead of the curve. If there's anything that goes wrong with it, we adjust it and we move on to other important business. I just think it was an easy, obviously it needs proper writing, but that's what we have you for, Mark. But I thought this would be a very straightforward process.
That happens a lot. I mean, I've been a lawyer for governments for a long time, and you get things that you think are going to be easy and straightforward, and then the lawyers get involved and it's not. But if Council Bozeman comes to me and says, I want a simplified version of this on the agenda for consideration of introduction, that's what we'll do, and that's how we'll handle it.
Out of curiosity, since we had the last discussion, so if I would say, I'm not doing it during this meeting, but just because we're in the gray zone, so I have the option, we have a general direction, I guess, and it ended up showing up on the regular meeting, or another option would be, I would ask for that ordinance and then put it on the regular, and it has my name behind it by Bosman's, and then we have a discussion, or because we're already in the process, I guess this is the second time we discuss this. We're really spending too much time on this, topics like this, in my opinion.
But we're in a transition between an old process and a new process of considering stuff. So that's okay for right now.
Okay, so is it a lot of effort to simplify this ordinance?
No, I mean, I fill the hours every day, so I can fill doing this too. Look, and I've said this to each of you privately, you guys are elected officials. You were voted by the will of the people to sit in the office that you sit in. That comes with certain authority. And one of my opinion is that if you feel like you need to bring an ordinance forward, you at least get the opportunity to have the council speak and say, yes, we want to consider this further, or no, we don't. So any of you, anytime you have some legislation, we'll educate you on it first. We'll get input from the staff first. But if you want it to appear on the agenda for a vote on being introduced, I think you have that right, and it's my job to help you do it.
So I personally would like to see a simplified version of this ordinance on the agenda during the next regular meeting or the one after that. If the general consensus of the council is not supportive of that, then I will not bring it up for the next 6 months.
All right, I'll prepare a simplified version to appear on a future agenda for introduction under the new agenda, to where it will need 3 votes to go forward and then actually have a public discussion and a vote.
Okay, so no more discussion. And so.